The golden sun stretched across the highlands of what is now southern Tanzania, its rays dancing over rolling green hills and whispering forests. The air was heavy with the scent of dew and destiny. It was the late 19th century, a time when Africa was being carved by empires that saw land but never its soul. Yet, in the heart of these hills stood a man whose name would soon echo across the continent, Chief Mkwawa, the lion of the Hehe people. The Hehe kingdom was not vast in number, but in courage it towered above all. Their warriors, tall and fierce, trained in unity under the dawnlight. They carried not just spears, but pride, the kind passed down through ancestors who fought for every inch of their homeland. The Germans who ruled the region they called German East Africa had underestimated these hills. They believed their rifles and military codes could silence African resistance. But they had never faced Mkwawa. The morning wind carried drums from the center of Kalenga, the Hehe capital. Villagers gathered near the great baobab tree, its roots older than memory itself. In its shadow stood Chief Mkwawa, tall, broad-shouldered, his eyes sharp as obsidian. He wore a deep red robe over his chest, and though his tone was calm, fire burned beneath his words. "They take our land," he said, voice steady. "They take our cattle. But what they cannot take is the heart of the Hehe. If they come for our pride, they will meet our ancestors first." The crowd roared, spears lifted to the sky, a thunder that rolled through the hills. This was no ordinary leader. Mkwawa understood strategy as deeply as he understood spirit. He knew that the German army had modern weapons, rifles, cannons, and discipline forged in Europe's wars. But he also knew they lacked what his people had, unity and the terrain itself. That night, the flames of the council fire reflected in Mkwawa's determined eyes. His generals sat around him, each representing a clan bound by loyalty. "They are moving from Moringa," one of his scouts reported. 300 soldiers. "They believe we will surrender," Mkwawa smiled faintly. "Then they will learn how mountains fight." The next dawn, mist curled through the valleys like smoke from unseen fires. The Hehe warriors moved silently, their bodies painted in ash to blend with the fog. From the ridges, they watched the German troops march in perfect lines, disciplined but unaware. Mkwawa raised his hand, his signal. The silence shattered into a storm. Drums thundered, spears flew. The earth itself seemed to rise against the invaders. The Germans panicked, their rifles firing into the fog. But the Hehe moved like shadows, striking and disappearing, their war cries echoing through the hills. Within hours, what began as an invasion became a retreat. The victory at Lugalo in 1891 shook the entire German Empire. Hundreds of soldiers had fallen, their commander killed, and their arrogance crushed by warriors they once called savages. In Berlin, the news caused outrage. In Kalenga, it sparked pride. The Hehe had done what no one thought possible. They had humbled an empire. Mkwawa stood at the edge of the battlefield, the morning light bathing his face. "This is only the beginning," he whispered. His lieutenants gathered around him, their spirits high. "We will defend every hill, every river, every breath of this land. Let the world know, Africa will not kneel easily." The following months were tense. The Germans regrouped, sending more troops, determined to crush the uprising. Villages were burned, crops destroyed, and rivers poisoned with fear. But the Hehe refused to bow. Instead, they grew stronger in spirit, building hidden fortresses within forests and mountains. Women carried supplies at night. Elders taught strategy and healing. Every man, woman, and child became part of Mkwawa's resistance. One night, as firelight danced across his face, Mkwawa spoke to his trusted warrior, Mtenzi. "They will come again stronger," Mkwawa said quietly. "But remember, power does not come from weapons. It comes from belief." Mtenzi nodded, gripping his spear. "Then we are already stronger than them. Meanwhile, German officers planned their revenge. In Iringa, a new commander named Tom von Prince studied maps and reports. Hehe, arrogance will be their downfall, he said, his voice cold. We will take Kalenga. We will end Mkwawa. But what he didn't understand was that Mkwawa's resistance was not just a fight, it was a symbol. To defeat him, they would have to kill an idea. As weeks passed, tension hung over the land. Farmers looked to the hills, praying for their sons and brothers who fought under Mkwawa's banner. Songs of courage filled the nights, soft melodies that spoke of pain, pride, and the dream of freedom. And far away, other African kingdoms began to whisper, if the Hehe can rise, maybe we can too. At the height of the struggle, Mkwawa climbed to the highest ridge, overlooking his homeland. The sky blazed orange with the setting sun, and the sound of distant drums carried through the valley. This land is our spirit, he said softly to himself. Even if I fall, the spirit will remain. If you're still watching this incredible story of courage, make sure to like this video and subscribe, because in part 2, you'll witness how Mkwawa's final stand became one of Africa's most powerful legends. As night fell, Mkwawa's warriors gathered again. They knew what awaited them, a battle larger than any before. The air was thick with both fear and faith. Mothers hugged their sons. Fathers sharpened spears in silence. Across the land, the cry of the Hehe people rose once more. Better to die on your feet than live on your knees. Under the silver moon, Mkwawa closed his eyes and whispered to the ancestors, guard our courage. Let our story never be forgotten. And from that night onward, the uprising of the Hehe would no longer be a secret. It would become the heartbeat of African resistance. The morning mist hung thick over the Iringa hills, cloaking the land in silence. But beneath that silence lay the pulse of war, steady, unbroken, waiting. Chief Mkwawa stood at the fortress of Kalenga, his gaze fixed on the horizon where German soldiers advanced like a tide of iron. The echoes of drums rolled through the valleys, not as celebration but as warning. It was 1894, and the final test of the Hehe spirit had begun. Mkwawa's fortress was more than stone. It was strategy. Built high upon ridges, surrounded by dense forest and secret tunnels, it represented the unity of a people unwilling to surrender. Inside, women prepared food for warriors, blacksmiths sharpened spears, and elders whispered blessings. Mkwawa walked among them, calm, focused, his voice a quiet flame. Today, he said, we fight not just for our land, but for the breath of our ancestors. Let every step you take remind you who you are, sons and daughters of Africa. As the sun climbed higher, the German army began its siege. Cannon fire thundered, shaking the ground. Smoke rose into the sky, turning day into dusk. Yet the Hehe stood firm, using the terrain as their greatest ally. They struck from the shadows, vanishing before the enemy could reload. Their war cries echoed across the hills, a haunting song of courage that even death could not silence. Von Prince, the German commander, watched from afar through his binoculars. They fight like ghosts, he muttered. But ghosts can be hunted. His soldiers advanced again, burning villages, cutting off supply routes, and killing anyone who resisted. Slowly, the Hehe fortress began to weaken. Food grew scarce, and the wounded lay scattered in the dark corners of Kalenga. Still, Mkwawa refused to abandon his people. If the fortress falls, he told his generals, our story must not. One night, under a sky filled with smoke and sorrow, he gathered his closest warriors. The flickering firelight carved shadows across their faces. They have taken much, Mkwawa said, but they will never take our spirit. If I fall, carry my message. Freedom is not a dream. It is a duty. His men nodded, tears glimmering in their eyes, but their hearts burned with unyielding faith. The next morning, the Germans attacked with full force. Bullets tore through the air. Spears clashed against steel. The cries of the wounded filled the valley, yet the Hehe fought like lions. The battle raged from sunrise to sunset, the ground stained with the sacrifice of heroes. Even as Kalinga's walls crumbled, Mkwawa refused to retreat. He moved from one defense line to another, his red robe fluttering through the smoke, shouting, "Hold the hills! Protect the spirit of our mothers!" When night fell, the fortress was in ruins. Flames devoured what was once the pride of the Hehe. Only a handful of warriors survived, retreating into the forest with their wounded chief. But the war was far from over. Mkwawa knew he could no longer fight with swords alone. Now he would fight with strategy, patience, and the belief that even in defeat, freedom could rise again. Deep in the forests of Iringa, Mkwawa became a phantom. German soldiers searched endlessly, but he always stayed one step ahead, his people feeding him, guiding him, protecting his location like a sacred secret. For 4 years he led a silent rebellion, striking German supply lines, freeing captives, and spreading the message of resistance across the region. Hehe songs carried his legend from village to village. He walks unseen, but his courage lights the night. By 1898, the Germans had surrounded every hill and valley. Von Prince issued an order: Mkwawa must be captured alive or dead. Soldiers closed in, destroying homes and capturing villages suspected of hiding him. Yet, even as the world shrank around him, Mkwawa remained unbroken. His body was tired, but his spirit fierce as ever. One evening, as the sun bled red across the forest sky, Mkwawa sat with his last few loyal warriors. "The land is changing," he said softly. "But remember, our fight is not lost, only passed on. Someday, our children will speak of this day, and they will know that we stood proud." His men begged him to flee, but he shook his head. "I was born to protect this soil, and if I must die, I will die upon it." The final confrontation came quietly. German soldiers closed in on a small cave near Kalinga, guided by informants. Inside, Mkwawa stood tall, his rifle in one hand and his dignity in the other. When the enemy called out for him to surrender, he gave no reply. Instead, he looked toward the hills, the land of his ancestors, and whispered a prayer for freedom. Then, refusing to be taken as a trophy, he chose death over capture. When the Germans entered, they found him lying still, proud even in death. His bravery became legend. The Hehe mourned their chief, but his spirit spread like fire across Africa. Years later, when independence movements rose, his name was whispered again: Mkwawa, the one who never bowed. The Germans took his skull to Europe as proof of victory. But in 1954, decades later, it was returned to Tanzania, an act that symbolized the return of dignity to a nation that had fought for its soul. Today, the fortress of Kalinga stands as a monument. The wind that blows through its stones still carries whispers of the Hehe warriors. Children of Iringa grow up hearing tales of Mkwawa not as a man who lost, but as one who showed the world what it means to fight for freedom. And as the African sun sets over those sacred hills, one truth remains: empires fall, but courage, true African courage, never dies. If Mkwawa's story touched your heart, share it. Let the world know Africa's heroes. Hit subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and keep the spirit of the Hehe alive. This is not just history, it's legacy.